Maybe not on that one.
To look into the camera.
Welcome back, Dale. How's the vacation? Good? I had a wonderful time.
We have to wait till we get a camera feed here. Ready? Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is the work session of the Cuyahoga County Council for Tuesday, August 9th, 2011, held here in the Justice Center, the first floor council chamber room. And this council work session is being streamed live on the internet. We welcome all of those who are watching and appreciate your consideration. Madam Clerk, and we'd like to welcome Nikki. This is her first time of being the clerk, and call the roll.
Calling the roll, Mr. Jones.
Here.
Mr. Rogers.
Here.
Ms. Simon. Mr. Greenspan.
Here.
Mr. Miller. Mr. Brady. Mr. Germana.
Here.
Mr. Gallagher.
Here.
Mr. Strawn. Ms. Conwell. Ms. Connolly.
We have a quorum. Item 3 for items of discussion regarding the proposed ordinance approving a biennial operating budget and capital improvement program. And this is being brought forward by Mr. Miller, and I will turn the program over to him. Note the appearance of Mr. Greenspan.
Okay. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I'd like to give my colleagues a brief overview of this piece of legislation. The purpose of it is to set up a 2-year budgeting process for Cuyahoga County, and the process would be by the first week in October of each odd-numbered year. The executive would submit to the council a proposed 2-year budget, which would be considered through our budget process and adopted by the end of the year. Now, the charter requires annual approvals. So because of that fact, this ordinance also provides that there would be an annual update in the off year, which would not be a full budget process, but it would be an update in which the budget numbers for the second year would be reconfirmed, and a few adjustments, if necessary, would be made. And because it would be a much smaller process, the submission for the annual update would not be required until the first council meeting in November, as opposed to the first council meeting in October. The timing of the process is set up to retain the feature that the county operates on a calendar year budget. In other words, we go from January 1 to December 31st, and the 2-year cycle is set up so that our biennial period starts 6 months after the state's biennial period, meaning that we would have the opportunity to see what the state does, and during the next 6 months in our budget process, we could incorporate anything needed to do to adjust to the new state budget as we adopt our 2-year budget. The advantages of going to a 2-year budget is that it allows for longer range planning, and particularly in areas such as dealing with IT contracts, it becomes useful to plan for 2 years rather than one. The other advantage is that going through a full-scale budget process, it's a time-consuming operation, both in terms of the council, the executive, the departments. It takes a lot of time and energy, and by doing the full process only once every other year, it would free up some time and energy to deal with other things. So these are the reasons why I think it would be a good thing to do, and my understanding is that Director Rubino and/or Director Steen have some additional information from the administration's perspective, so at the appropriate time, you can call on them to give their perspective.
Mr. Miller, I appreciate your comments. My basic question is, can you explain again in plain English? We have the charter that says we have to have the annual budget, and I understand the advantages that you're saying, but I'm not clear the process of how you're explaining to do this.
Okay.
I'm not opposed to it, I just don't understand, I can't relate it back in sort of like plain English.
Okay, the process, if this bill were to pass,
Okay.
in the first week of October of this year, the county executive would bring to us a budget proposal, and it would provide for proposed appropriations for 2 years. For the 2 years going from January 1st, 2012 through December 31st, 2013, instead of just for 1 year. And we would go through a full budget process. We would bring in all the departments, boards, and commissions, hear their budget, hear their issues, and adopt this budget. Then in the first week in November of next year, then the administration would come in with an annual update, which would be something similar to what we just did with the mid-year budget process. Except that for the annual update, I don't think it would be necessary for us to call in all the departments. We would focus on where adjustments are needed. And the charter says that the executive shall annually provide a budget that proposes the expenditures, the capital improvements, and also gives a narrative description of how money is proposed to be spent. So the administration would provide us that information as part of both the biennial budget and then the following year as part of the more limited annual update process. And that is basically how it would work. And then when you do the annual update process, it would only reconfirm the budget numbers for the second year of the biennial budget and include any changes that might be necessary. And then when you get to the following year, in the fall of 2013, well, then we would be back to a new cycle, and we would come in with another 2-year budget. So it would be an on and off kind of process.
Okay, Mr. Brady?
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. I support this proposal. I think it makes a a lot of good sense, and I particularly like the feature that allows us to be, on the same cycle as the state. I think it's so important to the county budget that until that's cleared up, it's pretty difficult to deal with. And since they do have a biennial budget, I think this is a great idea. My only question is, are we certain that we don't have to change the charter to have a biennial budget? Is that clear? And I guess to the law director, maybe, is that clear?
No, the charter speaks specifically in terms of an annual budget, and the submissions are annually, but it doesn't specifically dictate that you can't do it through an update process. So really what we're doing, what this ordinance is doing, is prior planning to do it in 2 years, but it's not removing the requirement that every year you do it. It's just you're calling it as an update, and you're still complying with the charter by having the annual submissions. You're just doing it in the form of an update as opposed to starting the process from scratch.
No, I support the process. I'm interested in listening to what the administration may have to say about it.
Mr. Schrein?
Yes, and I too have been in favor of this concept for quite a while. And the idea of actually going back and potentially even requesting it as a charter change to make sure that we can actually do a 2-year budget without having to do the annual updates, I think would be a legitimate question to even to be asking the voters to go back, because I think when it came forward to put us on a biennial budget just like the state, I think that I think it would get voter support to make sense. It makes a lot of sense, because I think there's a lot of powerful business arguments to create a 2-year budget too.
Yeah, you clearly can't do it without the annual update. I mean, you still need the annual updates, but...
Currently, but yeah, exactly. That's why I said if we go back, we're going to be going back potentially with charter suggested changes in the future at some point, and I think it could be part of that package.
Absolutely.
Mr. Rogers?
Thank you. I just have a question regarding a lot of the agencies that we do business with. We currently contract on a year-to-year basis. So would we now be going into 2-year contracts with many of these organizations we work with?
Madam Chair, to Councilman Rogers, the budget would provide 2-year appropriation authority, but I think it would still be the administration's option as to whether they would want to also contract for 2 years or whether they would want to continue with 1-year contracts. I think they could do it either way.
Ms. Conwell?
Madam Chair, to Councilman Miller, has this lined up with the Health and Human Service levy? You know, as the money comes in, I don't know, you mentioned first week in October, odd numbers. I haven't really been following it. Does it line up with the Health and Human Service levy on those years?
The lineup with the Health and Human Services levy would be that the levies would typically be on the ballot in the year that the annual update takes place. So because we would be doing the full scale budget this year, the election year for the levy is next year, and then the following year would be the year for the next 2-year budget, and then the other levy would come up the following year. So the levy elections would be on the years opposite when the full scale budget is done.
Thank you.
How did you wish for us to proceed? Is there any more discussion on this, or?
Madam President, I would recommend that we might ask the representatives from the administration if they would have some additional information.
Good afternoon. Matt Rubino, Office of Budget and Management. And maybe I could speak to some of the technical questions that you may have on the measure. First thing I want to state is the county has for many years now utilized a 3-year operating budget planning process. So even though we're only adopting 1 year of appropriation, the budget that we're crafting, even for this cycle in years past, has been on a 3-year basis. Now, do we take the 2 out years as serious as the budget year? Probably not. But by adopting this biennial budget process, you're making a policy statement that'll guide and further enrich the current process that we're now taking 2 years very seriously. Not that we don't take the 3rd year seriously. So we're already, from a procedural standpoint, whether it's at the very detailed technical level with the OBM staff and the administrative review, it's already dialed into a multi-year process. So now we're looking to adopt this 2-year approach. None of our urban peer counties do this, but we speak with them on a regular basis, and they've all discussed doing this. Some do utilize multi-year planning processes for operating and for capital. I think Franklin is one county. But we've always, again, had 3 years. And this also enables me to check off one item on my strategic plan to enact a biennial budget. So it makes things easier. On the reporting side and the technical side, yeah, there'll be some changes for us to institute. But that'll be handled on the more technical end with OBM staff and other areas of the administration. So the reports may be rebranded slightly, but again, we're already showing 3 years of data. Our budget reporting system is already set up to develop and capture 3 years of budget data. And we have very high degree of flexibility in how we utilize our current business process internally and the corresponding workflow in the reporting system to generate the reports to accommodate this biennial approach. And again, we're not shifting to a state fiscal year basis. We're still going to have calendar year. And Wade will speak to this, that there are certain requirements in ORC that have counties adopting calendar year budgets to meet certain dates and certain timelines. But we're syncing up with the planning process. The state, we know in March, there's a proposed budget in year 1. That gets enacted July 1st. We've already incorporated the final changes as we did this year, and we can move right into our 2-year planning process, adopt those 2 years through the administrative and the public hearing process. There's some questions on do we journal 2 years of budget data in the accounting system? It's more of a technical question. I wouldn't be concerned with that at this point. And as far as remaining true to the charter, we're still going to be submitting some form of operating budget each year. How we generate those numbers will change on that staggered basis. So we adopt a full 2-year approach. We'll be submitting an operating resolution for the next year. When we get to year 2, we could utilize something similar to the mid-year review process that we have with council, where the updates would be part of a fiscal agenda. So we would submit essentially a resolution as a combination of what we approved in year 1, plus or minus any changes that we submit on that fiscal agenda. So there's a variety of ways, I think, to approach year 2 of a biennial process and stay in conformity with the charter. I don't see that as an issue. So we'll already begin to think about process design, the way the reports look, and how we address a lot of the requirements we have within the charter and other county policies.
Mr. Greenspan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. To dovetail on Councilmember Rogers' question, right now, if you do a 3-year, kind of outlook, how do you project the out years for Health and Human Services, as an example, if they're not required to submit any support for your projections?
Well, we'll still institute our quarterly review process, and that will be feeding, just as it feeds the budget development process now, that quarterly review process will continue to feed this 2-year process in the update year also. So what we'll be doing is looking at, take for instance, we do a second quarter review next year in 2012. We'll also be reviewing the 2013 year. We'll be taking a look and reviewing how does the 2013 projection square up for the 2013 budget update year, or 2013 budget year. And that can be used as a tool for us to decide, do we need to increase or decrease certain line items within any county programmatic budget, whether it's Health and Human Services or the courts, but you name it, we can use that process to determine what changes are required. And there's also it's not just reviewing or analyzing the data, but there's a human component. There needs to be an established process where on the administrative side, we're meeting with whether it's directors, deputy chiefs, and looking at, okay, here's what we decided on a year ago for the second year of this budget. Here's what we're looking at with our latest projection. Where do you see or the need for additional appropriation or reallocation? And we can feed that into that year two update process. But we're doing that on a continual basis anyway. We're submitting our bi-weekly fiscal agenda. And a lot of those items are for grants and projects, but we do have adjustments to operating budgets. So there's an existing template there. In essence, we're going to take it, beef it up for that year two update, and turn it into a final product, which would be appropriation measure for year two. Less moving parts and less work, since we're not doing the full-blown run as we do in year one. And there are a few other, I think, beneficial things that, at the technical level at least, again, it gives us an opportunity to look at our reporting and our processes, do some rebranding, maybe find a few improvements here and there, because we're looking at a new policy as a guidepost for budget development. And we submit a document to GFOA. GFOA is the Government Finance Officers Association. We submit a fairly large budget plan to them within 3 months after budget passage. I think with the 2-year process, we would only do that every other year. I'm not sure, but it is a time-consuming process, and if that's the case, we would cut that down to every other year. So the good thing is, in principle, all the time and efficiency you're gaining by adopting this process can be pushed into other more qualitative and important things that support providing recommendations, analysis, looking at some of the other areas within what the county does, and trying to find other improvements in that off year.
All right, any other questions of Mr. Rubino?
If I could, Madam President, maybe address the question on contracting. I think the main thing that will not change is at the end of the year, we'll submit an appropriation request or an annual resolution to appropriate. So that's not different, regardless of the process, whether it's 1 year or 2 year, we're still doing that. At a certain point in time, late November, early December, whatever it ends up being, we'll submit that resolution, it gets approved. We now have appropriation levels that go into effect January 1st. From January 1st and on, the business process really doesn't change. The agencies that have multi-year agreements in place will request to certify funds. So that piece doesn't have to change. If they have a 2-year contract, three-year contract, they are probably already in the practice of certifying incrementally each year those funds for those 2 or 3 year contracts. So they would continue to utilize the same process.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Steen?
If I may just quickly follow up on that issue, because there is the issue about the multi-year contract, and we just went through that with Toshiba, is the county is able right now to enter into multi-year contracts. There is no prohibition on the ability to enter into multi-year contract. The issue is the ability of the fiscal officer to certify the availability of the funds, and when you have the appropriations happen. So the way that the county's been doing them, we did it in Toshiba, is we just entered a 5-year contract, but the appropriation every year, you come and appropriate for the following year, and that's the way we do it.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Wade Steen, Fiscal Officer. I want to thank Councilman Miller because I strongly support the idea of multi-year budgeting. Prior to my appointment as your fiscal officer, I was a council member, as were many of you. Upper Arlington had a 2-year operating budget and a 5-year capital plan, probably not different than many of you experienced. I know some come from school backgrounds. Schools have to do a 5-year plan. And as Matt mentioned, this will allow us to gain productivity and provide decision-making support to this council. It will allow this county to be an innovator. No other urban county does a 2-year budget. Very few, some rural counties say they do, they don't. So you would be a leader again in taking a step forward. And one thing that we've talked about often is the county's bond rating or credit rating. A multi-year budget enhances that. It shows accountability, it shows planning, and it allows for, again, better decision-making, not just by this council, but by those that are going to be receiving funds, because they're going to know what your plan is, whatever that particular task is. So I strongly support the idea. I think you're going in the right direction to take what I would call a very strategic step to do multi-year budgeting, and want to thank Councilman Miller for bringing it forward.
All right, Mr. Miller, is there anything you'd like to add? Anyone else have any comments? Ms. Simon?
I just have a question, and not necessarily to Mr. Steen. What happens, I want to understand why more counties are not adopting this 2-year plan budgeting versus annual. Is perhaps such a drastic, if we don't anticipate something in the second year, a market crash, state budget cuts more severe than we've ever seen, a levy that doesn't pass, do we just come in and amend? I mean, how does that work? What's the downside to adopting this biennial budget? Whoever.
Actually, Councilwoman, I don't know the answer to your question, but what I suspect is that it's because we've gone to this new structure of government that it's allowed us to begin to think in a different way. I think that, with other counties, with the traditional system of an elected auditor, an elected treasurer, an elected recorder, and coroner, that there's just been a traditional expectation built in around annual budgets, and they were submitted to the commissioners. I think I don't think there was any reason they weren't doing it. I just think that it is actually this new structure that kind of opens up your mind to think about this in a different way.
What's the negative? I mean, I anticipate just not being able to plan for future circumstances, but what else would one say would be a downside to this, if there is anybody?
I don't know if it's a downside, but it's something we need to be aware of. This first year, since we're doing a 2-year budget, this will be harder than doing an annual budget. The real work will be this first 2-year cycle. Once you get on that 2-year cycle, it becomes easier, but I think the councilman's correct. I think most people just think in terms of an annual budget, and I've said this often, you have a very good OBM department, and you have the talent there that can do this. Many counties don't have the luxury of having the kind of staff you have in OBM to help push this forward. So I think if the council is willing to dig in and the finance committee to do the work this first year, because you're going to be looking at 2 years worth of budgetary appropriation, it's the right step.
Mr. Schrein?
To Councilman Simons, I think there is a potential for a negative in that if people really don't look at this in a creative way, if they look at it just being a multiple of 1 + 1 = 2-year budget, that's a real risk. We really need to, this is an opportunity for us to go back to the well and actually start from a fresh set of eyes as far as when you create this 2-year budget. Because this is how you should be looking at it from a pure business standpoint. How do we negotiate our contracts? How do we look at every single thing? How do we appropriate the funds so that the funds are appropriated to support 2-year contracts, not having to go back and have to do set aside? So it's a different way of looking at the whole concept. And the risk, to me, the biggest risk will be that you just add 1 and 1 + 2, and you say that's our 2-year budget. And I don't believe that that's going to be allowed under the current director over there, nor Mr. Rubino. I have a feeling he's probably licking his chops to hit that element as far as his strategic plan, because this is where the dollars can really be saved, and this is what the voters really voted on, is making these kind of core business type changes, not just core county changes. So I congratulate them. So I think that's the only risk, is that some people that maybe in the past had been doing annual budgets just think that you get to biannual budget by adding 2.
Madam President?
Yes.
One more question. Thank you, Councilman Tron. To the director, you indicated that the hard part might be this first-time budget process with everything in flux and change. And would it make sense, and I'm not advocating this, perhaps is it better to do it all now, even though it's instead of waiting 1 more year, just to get everything in line? That's my question. I mean, do we want to try to do this now? And are we capable of adjusting at this point?
Councilman, through the chair, we're capable, and you might as well do it now. There's no benefit in waiting. I mean, every day, this council, the executive, you're changing the way government's done, and we're ready to do this. Your department heads and others are going to have to really work hard, because they're going to have to look at what they need for 2 years, 24 months, not just 12. But I'm confident in the leadership team in this county that they can do it. So I think the county's ready, and it's the right step. And selfishly, I want to be the first urban county to do a 2-year budget, so I can talk to my friends in Franklin County and say, hey, by the way, let me tell you guys how to budget. not just how to do other things, because you're going to be able to do it on a 2-year basis while they're doing it on a 1.
Bragging rights.
We don't know anything about that.
All right, is there anything further, any other discussion? Mr. Germain?
Madam Chair, everything I've heard, it just makes sense. In business, no business plans 1 year at a time. I mean, you're always looking multiple years. So running a county like a business, hey, it makes sense. I think the other thing is this dovetails pretty well with every 2 years we have a reelection stream for basically half the council. And this gives a little bit of opportunity for new council people, not having to grasp the full rebudgeting. So I think it really makes sense, especially if we do it and institute it at this point.
All right, thank you. This matter, is there any other, any discussion, or anyone else wants to comment? This item is on the agenda for this evening's meeting, item 11A, I believe. So we'll consider any vote at that time. Thank you, Mr. Miller, for your hard work on this. Did the executive want to chime in on anything on this?
I think it's a fine idea, and I think it has a lot of merit. The only criticism that, and I missed part of the discussion, maybe this was raised, was that there could be a perception that the council would be deferring their oversight or ability to make changes for 2 years, but that's not the case. I mean, really, the way budgets have been recently and the way revenues have been, the budgeting process is always going on. And so it's never going to stop a council, even a new council member, from saying, I think that there ought to be a change in the way that this particular budget line item is doing. And so I'm in favor of the proposal, and I appreciate the councilman for bringing it forward.
Thank you. All right, is there any miscellaneous business to be brought before the work session this afternoon? Is there any public comment? Has anyone signed in for public comment?
No, Madam President.
Is there anyone that would like to make public comment? Okay. This is a record time. Mr. Germana?
Madam Chair, as long as we have a little bit of extra time here.
Okay. Extra time is one of those oxymorons.
Well, I mean, because we got to stick around until 6 o'clock, so we're here anyway.
Well, didn't you promise to buy us all dinner up at Morton's Steakhouse?
The only place I know is the sushi place right down the street.
We'll take that.
The intergovernmental committee, I was planning on having State Senator Nina Turner come and speak to us on the bill that she was sponsoring about coordination and letting cities work with one another. And what I did find out is that was taken care of in the budget. Actually, in the budget bill, they took that provision. So actually bringing Nina Turner in here would, it's already done. So that was not a topic. As most of you know, I've been involved with the Northeast Ohio City Councils Association. And this is an association of city councils. There's approximately 35 or 36 cities in Cuyahoga County to belong. And we have quarterly forums. And at one of the recent board meetings, we were talking about, what topic is of interest to the membership and so on. And it was almost unanimous. Well, it wasn't almost, it actually was unanimous that all the board members of that association felt that after hearing what happened with the state budget and the local government fund and what happened with the expiration coming up of the estate tax, one of the big things that was on everybody's mind is the 6-year county reappraisal and what's happening with the Board of Revision. And there's so many homes in foreclosure. So I talked to Wade Steen and Marty Murphy, And what we're suggesting is that we host a forum for the Northeast Ohio City Council Association on September 15th, a Thursday night, and invite the council members to come to our meeting chambers. Normally, we don't get many council members here at a Cuyahoga County Council meeting because cities either have their city council meetings on Monday or Tuesday night. Thursday happens to be the time when we found that practically all the city councils that are members, they're able to come. So what we would like to do is have on September 15th this forum, and it would be at 7 o'clock. And we'd invite all the city council members that belong to the organization, as well as other city council members, and of course mayors and anyone else from the cities would be invited. And Wade Steen and Mr. Murphy both have agreed to speak to the topic of the 6-year reappraisal and the appeal process and what's happening with the Board of Revision. With that, I would like us to be able to extend to the city council members parking pass, since this is going to be past the 4 o'clock time. So if there's any questions about that or any comment, I'd be willing to hear it.
That's an excellent idea. We don't have to set that as a special meeting. Do we mark it as a committee meeting, or how do you want to mark it?
Well, because it's involving the other cities, I think it would be natural just to call it a intergovernmental.
Just make it your committee meeting?
If you'd like, I think it would make sense, because it is intergovernmental, dealing with the county and the different municipalities.
Okay, because we make sure that we get it, Nikki or George gets it up on the website, we can get it up right away and get the announcements so that if the public wanted to attend.
Right. Well, we just today I was able to meet and get this finalized just a half hour before this meeting.
Okay, and then we'll start working on the format, and you can work with the staff.
Right. And then I plan on having regular intergovernmental meetings starting back when we get back in September. Just for everybody's knowledge, I am going to be out the week of from the 13th of August through the 21st. So I'll be back for the next council meeting. Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Brady?
Madam Chair, thank you. Given that we have an opportunity, I've spoken with some members about this, but I intend to introduce a bill to create a Consumer Affairs Department for Cuyahoga County. Not some new bureaucracy with lots of employees or anything like that, should anybody be concerned. But the idea is that this would, first of all, the state of Ohio actually gives the county auditor's office, did in the past, the responsibility to enforce consumer affair law in the county. Here in Cuyahoga County, that is divided between the county and the city of Cleveland, which has its own home rule authority to do that. This would be wrapped around the current Weights and Measures Department, which I believe, probably needs to be brought into the 21st century in a lot of ways. And so I'd be introducing that legislation. It would be my hope that it would not be something that would be very costly for the county. But there are consumer affair laws that are not, there's no attempt to enforce them by a lot of counties, and particularly in Cuyahoga County for a long time. This is something that has been, I believe, neglected. I would hope that if that's the case, and if there's support for that, and that if that happens, that we would enter into discussions with the city of Cleveland as part of the effort to regionalize, to combine the two responsibilities for weights and measures between the city and the county, and actually create a county-wide Department of Consumer Affairs. The responsibility of weights and measures is there are things we have to do. Most of you are familiar with it because you see the stickers on the, at the grocery store, and that's really basically all anybody knows about it. But really, there's a whole body of law that the county is given the responsibility to enforce. And I mean, obviously, a lot of this, to a large extent, is kind of like the police on the highway. You're not going to be able to police the entire county in terms of consumer law, but there is someone there, and I'd like to see us bring on someone who is has a background in this area and knows what to look for, and I think it'd be very helpful once the community knows there is a place to go. Right now, you basically go to the Ohio Attorney General, and people are really unaware of the fact that this responsibility is lodged in county government, and in the past, particularly in the county auditor's office. So you'll be hearing from me about that.
Thank you. Mrs. Simon?
Thank you. I think Elizabeth Warren is looking for a job.
Yeah.
Reach out.
Well, that won't be my call, if at all.
Is there anyone else who has any other miscellaneous business? All right, is there a motion to adjourn? This is a record here.
So moved, Madam
All right, second, all those in favor say aye. All right, we shall
Aye.
adjourn until 6 o'clock for our regular council meeting.